You know, General, one of the things that we try to repeat on this show, I try to repeat on this show, is that two things can be true at one time. And so I say that as a precursor to what I'm going to ask you about China. Obviously, I've been a China hawk. I was back in Congress, constantly led the fight against extending MFN to China, constantly talked about the human rights abuses. And so we have that on one side. China is a threat to us militarily. They're a threat to us economically. But as you know very well, we also have to share the stage with China over the next 40, 50 years. This is a bipolar world again. So how do we recognize our differences with China while moving forward and figuring out how to deal with a country that's going to be an indispensable partner on economic issues, on environmental issues, on international security issues?
Well, Joe, I think the first thing to recognize is, hey, they're not going to be a partner. And so, you know, we hope for so long. And I think really probably the most significant shift in U.S. foreign policy that the Trump administration put into place was the shift on China and a recognition that China is a rival and that we need to compete. Now, that competition doesn't need to lead to confrontation, but I think our passivity, based on the flawed assumption that, hey, China, after they've been welcomed into the international community, they're going to play by the rules, they're going to liberalize their economy, and as they prosper, they're going to liberalize their form of governance. Hey, we have to just realize, hey, that's not true. Actually, the opposite is the case. What the Chinese Communist Party is doing, and what I argue in Battlegrounds, is that they're motivated mainly by fear of losing control and their aspiration, this aspiration to achieve national rejuvenation. And that fear of losing the Chinese Communist Party's exclusive grip on power is driving this establishment of an Orwellian, technologically enabled surveillance police state where they're extinguishing human freedom, you know, across the mainland, but now in trying to do it in Hong Kong. And they're becoming more and more aggressive internationally as well. You know, I mean, this is often framed, Joe, and I think this is really unfortunate because it's framed as like a U.S.-China problem. And it's because, you know, hey, the Trump administration is so mean. Actually, you know, look at what China's doing. Look at what they did with COVID, suppressing the news of it, you know, foisting it on the world in large measure. The wolf warrior diplomacy, you know, that added insult to injury in that connection. You know, the bludgeoning of Indian soldiers to death on the Himalayan frontier, the national security law and the repression of freedom in Hong Kong. What could be the largest land grab in history if they succeed in doing it in the South China Sea, the threats to Taiwan, okay, the huge, massive cyber attacks on Australia. Is this really just is this a U.S.-China problem? No, this is a free world China problem. And that's what I argue in the book is, hey, it's past time for us to recognize that this is a real threat. Now, and again, I think we don't have to buy into this false dilemma, right, of this Thucydides trap, which means really essentially you have, the way some people interpret it, a stark choice really only between passivity and accommodation of the party or confrontation. And so I think competition is the theme.
Well, on the topic of China, General McMaster, negotiations are continuing to close a deal with TikTok for U.S. control of the company after President Trump gave his blessing on Sunday for the video sharing app to move forward with Oracle and Walmart. But Kara Swisher, who studies the tech industry very closely, doesn't understand the deal. Take a listen.
What I'm confused about is why China still owns this company. ByteDance is still the principal owner, and Oracle and Walmart together own about, 20%. So I'm not really clear who has control here. The other part is I'd like to know where the code goes. I'd like to know who's in charge of the algorithm and how exactly Oracle is going to protect the information. It's so lacking in detail that it's really hard to understand how someone could bless it. Maybe he has other information that we don't. But I don't know if they have total control of TikTok without owning it. It's confusing to me.
Kara added on Twitter, the more reporting I do on this, the more it is a sleazy backroom deal that protects no one and advantages Trump supporters and inexplicably the Chinese government. General, what is your take on this? Any questions come to mind?
Well, I think in the clip you showed, those are exactly the right questions to ask, Mika. You know, what China's engaged in and what I describe in the book is this really sustained effort to just suck in as much data as they can. And what they hope to do is then apply artificial intelligence technologies to gain a differential advantage in the emerging data economy and also to weaponize our data against us. So anybody who says, oh, why should we be concerned about TikTok's algorithm? I think we should just ask the question of them, hey, do you expect the Chinese Communist Party to treat you better than they treat their own citizens? And so these are important questions, right? Who owns the algorithm? Where does the data go ultimately? But this is the beginning, I think. This is the beginning of I think what has to be a sustained effort to protect ourselves against these kind of pernicious efforts to steal or to transfer or to trick us into giving up our data to the Chinese Communist Party.
General McMaster, Willie Geist, good to have you with us this morning. You say in the book, as you talk about Russia and China, for example, that our competitors view us as weak and divided. As you know well, it wasn't always that way. So to what extent do you think this administration is responsible for that perception from abroad?
Yeah, I don't think this administration created those divisions, Willie. I think we're doing it to ourselves across the political spectrum. And I mean, of course, the president could be much better in terms of the voice and his voice and what he says. But I think oftentimes, Willie, the reaction to what the president says is just as bad, you know. And so I just think all of us have to take ownership of this and recognize, hey, let's not be our own worst enemies, right? I mean, Russia's not creating these divisions, but boy, they're making full use of them. And what they try to do, and really what the whole meddling in the 2016 election was mainly about, it was mainly about dividing us on the most divisive issues. Race was 80% of the Russian bot and troll traffic, followed, a distant second by immigration and gun control. So they know what they're doing. In fact, this is out of the old KGB playbook. I describe in the book the roots of these kind of efforts that go back to the 1920s. But of course, they have new tools available. They have social media, the algorithms of which help drive us apart from each other and create conditions. What I say in the book is, that we are better connected to each other electronically than ever, but more distant from each other psychologically and emotionally, right? So I think it's just time for all Americans to create venues for us to have respectful discussions about the greatest challenges we face and what we're going to do to build a better future for generations to come. And that's what I hope the book will do. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the book. And I just think we have to come out of these triple crises that we're in, of the pandemic, the recession, the divisions in our society laid bare by the horrible murder of George Floyd, and anger and frustration over inequality of opportunity. There's so much we can agree on, Willie. Let's just get after it together. And I think it's past time for us to do that.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.